Yeah, we're good. Hey, hello and welcome everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have a really good treat in store for us today. Dr. Iraj Khodadoost is one of my friends, and we work together so much. We both share a very common love for Rumi. So when I think of Rumi, he's one of the folks that I think of because he really explains and imparts the wisdom, I feel, of Rumi. So let me give you a little bit of history about Dr. Khodadoost. Dr. Kodadu's grandfather was a Sufi who loved Rumi and tried to practice his faith through humility and the love of others. Dr. Kodadu's father was a Muslim who embraced the Baha'i faith and his early youth, and with the belief that the religions and chapters are the same book and that they are progressively revealed to guide us toward ultimate peace, unity, and that religion should be the cause of love and affection. Otherwise, we are better without it. Dr. Kodadu's mother loved poetry of the great Sufi master, Persian poets such as Sinai, Attar, Rumi,
Sadi.
Sadi, and Hafiz. She considered their words of wisdom divine and always read a few of their passages, particularly those of Hafiz, as she tried to put her kids to sleep at night. So now I'm kind of, he was born in the cradle of this magnificent Sufi. So I'm starting to get a really big picture of what he emanates. Dr. Kodaduce grew up to love these poets and their works, as well as the Baha'i contribution to global peace and understanding. He traveled across the globe from early age initially with his parents, and then went his own through the Middle East, Russia, Europe, Africa, South America, and North America, trying to share the poetry of theology of love, harmony, and unity. Academically, he's got a master's in accounting. Go figure. This will resonate with this group here. Another in industrial management and a doctoral degree in public administration with a certificate in global policy studies. He taught accounting and the industrial management for 30 plus years at the University of Georgia, Missouri State, Clemson University, and some overseas universities in Switzerland, Italy, and elsewhere. During his retirement, he has been going to places and singing, no reading, but it's kind of, yeah, you'll see it kind of morphs into both the poetry and the theology of life, love, and unity until we come to embrace that thought that we are all flowers of one garden and this lifespan of earth is one country and mankind is citizens. I'd like to welcome Dr. Iraj Khodadoost. Thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Just one concluding word about myself. There isn't really much to tell. And is that the practice of the Baha'i faith very much reveres Buddhists and all other faiths. And anyone who has been to North Chicago, there's a huge Baha'i temple. You've seen that, which is this temple in North Chicago. And Baha'i temples, the way they're designed all across the globe, they have 9 sides representing all 9 main religions of the world. You know, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i faith, and so on. So the idea is, come through any door, sit anywhere you like, pick up any scripture you like, and just meditate on it, read it. And the hope is that eventually practice of religion will become like that. Revering all faiths, all paths, understanding if there is any difference, why there is difference. There is the reason. And briefly, in 3 short sentences, the Baha'i faith said that moral and spiritual teachings of all faiths are essentially one and the same, on compassion and justice and unity and kindness and all these things is essentially one and the same. Social teachings, to a certain extent, are different, maybe different, because of the needs of the time. They were revealed at different times in history. Through history, I don't know how it was 2,000-3,000 years ago in India, but for the most part, men and women were not considered equal, right? And so you see scriptural passages, in some scriptures at least, where they're not considered equal. Or even the question of race. Slavery was accepted throughout the history of man. So those were social teachings or mores of the time, which are not applicable today. And then the third aspect is theology. And theology is basically man-made. You know, this church and that church and even understand there are different practices of Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam. There are 72 sects in Islam. There are hundreds of sects, denominations in Christianity and so on, is all man-made. So if you put aside the man-made part and put aside the social teachings which are not applicable today, it's all one and the same. So that's the idea. Baha'is sing a song that God is one, man is one, and all religions agree. When everyone knows the three onennesses of God, man, and religion, then there'll be peace on earth. There'll be peace on earth. As difficult and as simple as this is, that is really it. Then we'll see everyone as members of the same family. Now going to the subject of today, which is Rumi, I'll talk to you about 50 minutes or so about Rumi, his life, and then we'll share with you some of his loving poems, particularly the ones that I relate to. I taught a couple of courses at a few churches this past quarter. In schools we call it quarter or semester. It was just like a semester. It was 8 sessions. And we had 8 sessions on the essentials of the Baha'i Faith and 8 sessions on the essentials of Rumi. So I'm going to summarize that 8 sessions of Rumi in 1 hour. 20 minutes is who he was, and 20 minutes his the poems that I basically know from heart. So, but even though I want to talk about him and his life, I want to begin with one of his poems, which is essentially who he says he is and what he says he wants to share with mankind. Again, that essence of love and oneness and kindness and compassion toward all of us. He says, "From the beginning of my life, I have been looking for your face. From the beginning of my life, I've been looking for your face. But today I've seen it. Today I've seen the charm, the beauty, the unfathomable grace of the face that I was looking for. Today I found you, and those who laughed and scorned me yesterday are sorry that they were not looking as I did. I'm bewildered by the magnificence of your beauty and wish to see you with 100 eyes. My arrow of love has arrived at the target. I'm in the house of mercy, and my heart is a place for prayer. My heart is a place for prayer." In many ways, essentially, that is his message. And that was the message of Buddha and Jesus and all the rest. We need to harmonize this thought to come to that essence of oneness. But now, how did Rumi become Rumi? And what was his life? He was born in the year 1207 in a city called Balkh. That whole area was called Persia, from today's Afghanistan and Turkmenistan and today's Iran and Iraq, and for the most part Turkey and Syria. This was all the greater Persia at the time. So he was born in a city called Balkh, which is today it is in the border of Iran and Afghanistan. And his father was also a Sufi, so he was born in a Sufi tradition. Sufism, and like in Judaism, they call it Kabbalah, and then Christian mystics. They had all come to that conclusion of unity and harmony and oneness and connection to God. They all had that element in them, including Sufis. So he was born in that kind of a family. His title, what they began to call him from the time he was 30, 35 years old, was Maulana. Maulana. So I'm going to teach you a few Persian words, or Persian, and some of them are Arabic. Go next. So Maulana really means my master, my guide, my refuge. So in his honor, they called him Maulana. Nobody knew him by the name Rumi even he himself did not know that he's Rumi for the next, for some 500 years or more. So he was Maulana. And his name was not Rumi, his name was Jalaluddin. Jalaluddin. Jalaluddin Muhammad. Actually, this is part of his name. Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi was what he came to be known for the rest of his life. Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi, that was his name. Now, 500 years later, for the first time, the West started to learn something about Persian poets through a fellow whose name was William James, who worked in the court of in India, and at that time the official language of the court, even in India, was Persian. So he came across some poems of the poets of the East, such as Sana'i, that was mentioned, Sana'i and Omar Khayyam and Attar, and then Rumi and Hafez. And he was really impressed by what these people had to say.
That's just a mindfulness bell. 15 minutes. Brings us back to the moment.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I needed that too. Then Maulana, what was I going to say? So I was saying that he was brought to the West in the middle of 18th century. So by until then, nobody knew anything about these Persian poet masters. They were not only poets; they were poets, philosophers, theologians, and a lot more. Particularly these few that I mentioned. But somehow, at that time, middle of 18th century, they focused more on two of these five. And the two of them, one of them was Omar Khayyam. Have you all heard about Omar Khayyam? Mm-hmm. Most of you have heard Omar Khayyam. And then the other one, Hafez. So in late 18th century and early 19th century, the two poets whose work, or at least part of their works, were translated were from Omar Khayyam and Hafez. And Goethe, the poet, philosopher of Germany, has a lot of references to Hafez. And then Omar Khayyam's poetry, which was translated early 19th century, became an instant bestseller in England and then gradually elsewhere. But still not many knew anything about Rumi. Until like 1880s, when an Orientalist by the name of Edward Brown, he went to Iran, his intention was not to go and learn about Rumi, but his intention was to go and find out about Baha'i faith. Why is it that they're killing Baha'is right and left in Iran? What is this phenomenon? So he came to study Baha'i faith, and then he came across Rumi, the idea of Rumi, and says, wow, how beautiful. 800 years ago, there was a fellow by the name of Rumi who had these ideas and then such loving poetry. And so he was introduced to the West by that time. I want to see 20 minutes on Rumi and then go to poetry. But it has to be another 5 minutes, I think. So this is how Rumi came to the West. Edward Brown, 1880s. And then after him, there were a couple of wonderful translators and professors of where Edward Brown also taught, which was Cambridge, those were, the name was Nicholson is one of them, Nicholson, who has some of the best early translation of Rumi poetry, and then Arbery, who is another one. These are long before Coleman Barks and some of the current ones, who had some wonderful translation. And some of the poems that I share are primarily from their translations. Some of the current ones that I read, I enjoy off and on, but I go back to Rumi's poem. I said, that's not really what he said. So they make up some of the stuff too and make it more flowery or something. But the original translators were more precise in what he said, what he meant to say, and how they translated it. Now, I want to go back a little bit to his life. Born in 1207, but then he, together with his family, moved or escaped to Samarkand. Anyone knows where Samarkand is? Today's Turkmenistan. Maybe 200 to 150 miles north of Balkh. So they went there in 1213, like he was 6, 7 years old. And then from there, in a few years, by the year 1220, they escaped again and moved to a city called Neyshabur. And Neyshabur is in today's Khorasan, which is in the west, in the easternmost part of Iran, west of today's Afghanistan. He moved there. And I'll tell you shortly why they had to move so much. And then from there, they moved to Baghdad, today's capital of Iraq, all those places, which is, again, it's like 8 centuries ago, a full mess. And then from there, finally, he, together with his father, family, moved to Konya, which is in today's Turkey. How old would he have been? He was born in 1207, and this is 1228 when he moved to Konya. 21. He was 21. He was 21. So his father was still a Sufi master, and he was a teacher, professor, and he taught the basic Sufi tradition. And his father died in 1231. For the next 10 years, he was still studying and trying to, Rumi was studying and trying to enhance his understanding of Sufism and those ideas. And by the year 1241, he became a full-fledged professor, theologian, and all of that. And he had a large congregation in the city of Konya. And by the way, the reason why the West called him Rumi 500 years later was because not then, back a few centuries before that, that area was part of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Turkey area was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, so Rum and Rumi. So they said, we'd like to call him Rumi. I said, fine. Call him Rumi. I guess he wouldn't mind. So he was a full-fledged professor by 1241. But still, he was not a poet. He had not written even one line of poetry. By the way, his language was Farsi, Persian, the language they also speak. And Farsi, they write it from right to left. It may be too late for some of you guys to learn Farsi, because it's not easy, particularly when we grow up. They write from right to left, and many letters are connected as they write it. And for some reason, most of his poems, this is one of his poems, have 9 lines. There were 9 lines for each one of his poems. So now we're coming to Rumi, who Rumi became. He was still a theologian, a professor of religious studies and things such as that. But in 1244, those of you who know something about Rumi know about this guy. His name was Shams. Shams. Have you heard about Shams? Some of you know about Shams. Shams was one of the fellows who came to his congregation. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the huge mosque or someplace where he spoke. And he noticed that somebody comes in ragged clothes and sits in a corner here and just listens to him and doesn't say a word. never says a word. So he noticed him for days and days and weeks. And one day, he got up and went to him, and he said, what do you think of my lecture? What did you think of my lecture today? Rumi said. And Shams said, not much really. And he said, what? Everybody praises what I say, and they think that I know a lot of stuff. I've studied for 10 years in university and all of that. So you say, not much? What's wrong? And so Shams says, you seem to be too full of yourself. You think you know a lot, and you just keep repeating what they taught you in university, whatever they taught you. Calm down. Relax. You don't have to use your mind all the time. Begin speaking with the language of the heart. Language of the heart. That was the beginning of Rumi's transformation. This is when Rumi became Rumi. Until then, he was a regular professor like myself, just going and learning something and regurgitating, repeating what you've learned to the students. But then, this process was not easy for him to go from the way he was to the way he became. He went home and actually got sick. He was sick to his stomach. I've studied all these years. I'm a professor. Now this guy comes and says, I don't really, this isn't really much. You have to change and all that. So he came home, he got sick, and then he started whirling, and that's why they became whirling dervishes, right? He came whirling and whirling and whirling. And in that process, they say that you become one with the universe, one with God. Turning and turning and turning and turning to understand who he was and who he really wants to become. So after a couple of weeks that he said he was sick and he wasn't going to work, he wasn't going to his classes, he came back. Everybody noticed that he's not the same man. And he started composing poems. And for the next 29 years of his life, which is from 1244 to 1273, when he passed away, I think, is that when he composed poem. Every day, rather than starting out getting a lecture, he had composed one. It just came naturally to him. He composed a poem and shared it with these people. Gradually, his congregation was about 10,000 people. They could not accommodate them in that huge mosque that they had. So it had to be different sessions from morning to night that he taught. 2 hours, and then they go, another group would come, another group would come, and so on. And so basically, it was one poem, and then he would share it, and then they would meditate, they would whirl, they would sing. So he said, really, we have to modify religion to this meditation and prayers and singing and dancing and loving one another and becoming one with the universe. And gradually his congregation were Jews and Christians and Muslims and some Hindus and Buddhists who had come to that area. They would come. And this was his congregation. He could not accommodate them. People were dying for something like this, right? So that's where he started composing poems. So I'll share with you some of his poems, some other of his poems. So again, we all get the inspiration from one another. As he got inspiration from all these people who were coming to him and hugging him and wanting to be part of this, whether they were Jews or Muslims or Christians, or it didn't matter. All of them. So one day he composed this poem. He said, "What is to be done, O people? What What is to be done, O people? For I do not recognize myself. I'm neither Christian, nor Jew, Gabr, Hindu, Buddhist, nor Muslim. I'm not from the east or from the west. I'm not from the north nor from the south. I'm not from this country or that country. I'm not from the sea nor from the land. I'm not of nature's mint nor of circling heavens. My place is the placeless. My trace is the traceless. It is neither body or soul, for I belong to the soul of the beloved. I have put duality aside. I have put duality aside. I have seen that the two worlds are one. One I seek, one I see, one I know, one I call. This became his religion, right? Oneness. Putting aside separations. Learning from one another. And then making it whole, making it one. So that was the new Rumi for the rest of his life. And then, through these poems, he revitalized the whole community of people who became gentle. That's the meaning of religion, right? They became gentle, like yourselves, kind, peaceful, loving, unprejudiced, unsuperstitious, without a pile of unfounded dogmas. They were open because they opened their heart. They opened their heart. So then I'll share with you some of his lessons, daily lessons. So one of his daily lessons, a poem, he says, if you, all of us, if you get rid of yourself, just once, the secret of secrets will open to you. If you get rid of yourself just once, the secret of secrets would open to you. The face of the unknown hidden behind the universe would appear in the mirror of your perception. We look for God in the church, in the synagogue, in this place, in that place. He says, just clear your mind of all of these things. And then the God would appear here. The God is right here, in your heart, in your soul, in your mind. Here. So that was his lesson for one of those days. Then he says, I have spent my life, my heart, and my eyes this way. I used to think that love and beloved are different, or the lover and the beloved are different. I know now that they're the same. I was seeing one in two, so connecting both us and God, whatever the notion of God is, because a lot of it is man-made. We don't really know the essence of God. So it connects and become one, and essentially it boils down into ultimate love of one another and serving the humankind. There was one that I had in mind. I don't see it here. Oh, by the way, he has two sets of books. If you, I said he composed one poem of about 9 lines, something like this, every day, for 29 years. And those of you good at math, if you compose 29, for 29 years, one poem a day, how many would it be? Probably about 10,000. So he has about 10,000 poems. The first series of his poem, which is about love, so many different aspects of love, probably about 7,000 poems, is one series of books which is called Divan. Actually, it's Divan-e Shams Tabrizi. He, in the honor of Shams that he met in his youth, and he transformed him. So it's called Divan. And in many of his poems, he mentions Shams. He learned from his humility and his depth of love and his frankness and his honesty and all of that.
Sir, can you spell Shams?
Yeah. Divan Shams. And Shams actually literally means the sun, and his name was the sun that shines. So Divan Shams Tabrizi. And he was from the city of Tabriz, which is the city in the north of Iran, northwest of Iran. So he was from there. So it's called Divan Shams Tabrizi. Now his second series of books is called Masnavi. You may have heard of it. I see that as a more mature Rumi. These are the poems that were revealed in the last 11 years of his life, where all of these thoughts had intertwined, and he became a more complete person in many ways. So, in one of his poems, he says that yesterday, now listen to, a lot of them was a lesson, and then based on that lesson, he would give his lecture and they would talk. He says, yesterday I was clever. I wanted to change the world. Mm-hmm. Today I'm wise. I want to change myself. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, it boils down to that. Mm-hmm. You know? Yes, all of us want to see a better world. All of us want to see a better government, better this, better that. But ultimately, he said it boils down to changing ourselves. So that becomes one of his lessons. How can we change ourselves? And it's through all of these things that we do: prayers, meditation, and service to others, service to the humankind. Actually, in one of his poems, he says, I may have it right here somewhere. In one of his poems, he basically says that, you know, that ultimately, do I have it here? Yeah. This was, he says, this was one of his days, his lessons. How shall a man know God? He says, not by senses, for he is immaterial. How shall a man know God? Not by senses, for he is immaterial. Not by intellect, for he is unthinkable. Not by philosophies, for it sees double. In this way or that way, this truth or that truth. But then he says, he says you will know God when you succeed in self-purification. How? Then he says, through prayers, service, and godly living. He wants the combination of prayers, service to humanity, and godly living. It boils on to that, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'll share a few more, and then we'll open up for discussion. And on the issue of not looking so much up there for God, but down here, he says, by day I praised you, God. By day I praised you and never knew it. By night I stayed with you and never knew it. I always thought I was me, but no, I was you and never knew it. Connecting God, man, all of it's one and the same. So this was another day of one of his lessons. And then with regard to, for us and our lives and our priorities, he says, be like earth. Be like earth. So that roses may grow in you. Humility. Be like earth so that roses may grow in you. For nothing other than soil can be a medium for the growth of roses. Then when they asked him how he is able to reveal these beautiful poems, he says, in your light, and his light. In your light, I learn how to love. In your beauty, how to make poems. You dance inside my chest when no one sees you, but sometimes I do, and that sight becomes this art. So that was the answer to that question. At the beginning of this second series of books, which is called Masnavi, he has a poem which is very famous in the East particularly, in which he says, you know about reed, you know what reed is? Sugar cane, and he says that basically we human beings have become like this reed, which is cut from its source. And we are trying to get back to the source in somehow. So he says, what did he say about reed? He says, a craftsman, that's God, pulled the reed from the reed bed, cut nine holes in it, and called it a human being. If you cut 9 holes in a reed, what does it become? A flute. Then he says, since then it has been wailing a tender agony, never mentioning the skill that gave it life as a flute. We are like a flute singing, but we better have a good song to sing. And he says, we are like that. We're just struggling to find the truth, to find ourselves, and all of that. I'll share a couple more, and then open up for discussion, and maybe we'll read a couple more later. And then also about the reed, he says, listen to the story of the reed, of being separated from its source. He says, since I was cut from the source, I have been wailing. Anyone who is apart from its one who loves understands what I say. Anyone cut from the source longs to go back to the source. So he sees that we are in that process. This is a journey, and we are in this journey temporarily until we go and meet the beloved. Some of his lessons are admonitions and advice, and some of them bring us back to the source of love and nothing else. Maybe I'll share with you 2 or 3 more short ones, and then open up. At the end of his life, he says that my life can be summarized in 3 sentences or 3 phrases. I was raw, just like all of us. I matured, and I was annihilated. I became nothing. And in many of his writings, he says, when you become nothing, that is the beginning of the journey. You become light. Light both physically, and you're seeing the light. And then you can grow and advance. And then I guess some days he probably saw some of the problems around him. And that's one of those days. He says, do you know why we are in this heap of trouble? And without having committed a sin, we still have to dearly pay for it? Then he says, it is because we destroyed knowledge and wisdom with our own hands and replaced it. It refers to the practice of different religions. And replaced it with a heap of prejudices, superstitions, and unfounded dogmas, and call it religion. So he says that's why we're in trouble. And finally, when he was ready to die, he left this with his congregation. He says, when you see my funeral, don't say what a separation. It is time for me to visit and meet the beloved. Since you have seen my descent, then do see my rising. Why complain about the setting of the moon and the sun? Which seed that went under the earth failed to grow up again? For my funeral, call the drummers, timbal beaters, and tambourine players. March toward my grave dancing, thus happy, gay, intoxicated, with hands clapping, so that people would know that the friends of God go happy and smiling toward the place of meeting. Now, we are open for a little chat. Or silence, or both. Please.
So, and this is maybe a segue, but
Please.
would you mind quoting some Rumi in Farsi? It's nice
Oh.
to hear the original. Yeah, is that okay?
Of course, I'd love to. I'll show you the gist of one of the first poem I recited. What is to be done, O people, for I do not recognize myself. He says, actually, this is the poem, the poem that I brought here. I know it by heart. He says, چه تدبیری مسلمانان که من خود را نمیدانم نه ترسا و یهودیم نه گبرم نه مسلمانم نه شرقیم نه غربیم نه بریم نه بحریم. And it all rhymes. Farsi, it all rhymes. نه ارکان طبیعیم نه از افلاک گردانم. Then in the middle he says مکانم لا مکان باشد نشانم بی نشان باشد نه تن باشد نه جان باشد که من از جان جانانم. So that's how it sounds.
How was it in English?
It was the one you-
Is it, what is to be done, O people, for I do not recognize myself.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm neither from the east or from the west, nor from the north or south, and all that.
Two questions.
Please.
One, he and Shims were kind of in a like relationship for the rest of their lives, weren't they?
Well, I shortened it because we didn't have time, but he met Shams in 1244, and Shams somehow disappeared in 1248. So they were together, basically, they were together all day, and then all his waking hours was with him, conversing a lot. And somehow Shams disappeared. Some people say that most probably he was killed by somebody who did not like so much attention of Rumi to this one man, and then having changed from that professor to this guy who speaks about love all his day, nothing else. So they say that he was most probably he was killed by somebody. And now after he just disappeared for the next he got sick again for another 2-3 months of lamenting and said, what happened? What happened? And then, but in that process of lamentation, and that's why suffering, also in his writing and writing of many prophets, is necessary for human growth and deepening. So after 3-4 months of his passing and suffering, all of that, Rumi came to a deeper level of who he was and his connection to God and Master of the universe. So that was that part of the question. Was there another question?
The other question is when you gave the dates of Rumi's life, I don't remember the exact dates, but somewhere in there is when the Mongols would have invaded Persia.
I abbreviate that part too. I didn't ever mention that. The reason why he was escaping from city to city from the age of 6 and 7.
My question is like, why was he back?
Yeah, until they went through all this region, which is now 10, 20 countries, because Mongols were invading, Genghis Khan. And if you think Hitler was bad, Genghis Khan was really worse. If you read about him, and particularly the Persian-speaking people know, because even now, I haven't been there for 50 years, but 50 years ago, when you still went through cities, they would point to a complete desert and piles of, still destroyed area, which could have been a city of some kind. This is one of the cities that Genghis Khan destroyed 700 years ago. Tens of cities. His method was this: he would go to a city, and Rumi And all these poets came in that kind of time period. So rather than hate, they enhanced love in them. So he, what was I going to say? Old age, you know, if you forget what you want to say.
The Hans, what did they do to the cities? What did the Hans do to the cities?
Yeah, the way they were doing the cities, and in comparison to what happened with World War II, that he would send 10, 20 soldiers to the governor of that area, and you would say that if you submit, that you have two choices. If you submit, we will only kill all of your army soldiers. He wanted to be benevolent. We'll kill them and we'll leave you alone. If you don't, we'll destroy your city and kill all of you. And he was true to his word. All of these cities that he went to, Samarkand, Bukhara, Neishabur, Baghdad, all of them, these are the cities which were leveled, completely leveled. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And then those who could, they could escape and they would go to another place. He was lucky that he could escape from this area to another area. So that was the reason. And then not only that, what was happening from the west in that region, which is also a mess again today, Syria and Iraq and all the rest? Crusaders.
Yeah.
For 200 years, crusaders were coming from the west in order to kill all the Jews and Muslims and make the world peaceful. And the Mongols were invading from the east to make the world one country in their version. And they were successful for 120, 200 years of conquering almost all Asia, and Eastern Europe became under Mongol domination back then. So that was the answer to that one.
I have a question from online. It was about Shams. Do we know any more details about Shams other than what you've already mentioned?
No one has been able to figure out conclusively what happened. Some people think that he purposely went to today's Syria, Damascus area, in order to allow Rumi to grow even further from what he was. But most people conclude that no, he was probably killed.
And the same question was it one of his sons who killed him? Do we know?
Definitely not, so far as I know. He had two sons, and the two sons were supportive of him, and they were the ones who actually, with the help of his bright students, were able to compile and collect all of his writings after he passed away, and begin the Rumi Sufi tradition, which continues until today.
Thank you.
I'm curious about there was a shift at some point between 10,000 people being in the mosque to hear Rumi and people being martyred for saying that I am God. How did that happen? What was that shift about?
Well, the question of I'm God part happened 200, 250 years before Rumi, 950 or so, and the name of the fellow who was killed was one of those initial Sufi tradition that he said, I'm God, but then he meant that God is in me. And because of that, he was martyred, he was killed. And in many ways, that was the beginning of the Sufi tradition. And the two poets in particular that Rumi gives credit to, I'll write the name down here, no, in particular were Sana'i and Attar. He actually met Attar, he was an old man, when he was 13, when Rumi was 13, when he went to Neishabur, one of these cities in eastern Iran, today's Khorasan. This is how that happened. Any other thought?
And at what point did Sufism start to be persecuted by the more traditional Muslims in Iran?
I mean, it's probably the whole Middle East still. Probably. Let me put it this way: all the Persian-speaking people that I've come across throughout my life revere Rumi and those others who are in that tradition, like Sanai and Attar and Hafez and all the rest. Fundamentalist Muslims, like fundamentalists in all religions, said that no, he has changed religion. He is now writing these poems that this is all one religion, all that kind of stuff. So they continue to persecute Sufis and say that this is not religion. This is not really part of what we believe, and therefore we don't accept you. We shun you. So this is the extremists that we see that are really, when you think about it, extremists are all over the place. The extremists who think that this nation should be the nation of white people even now, right? Or the extremists who say that we need to have this wall in here because those guys are all bad guys who come here. And then the extremists of this type, so the extremists are in nationalism, racism, religious fanaticism, all of those kinds. And that sometimes there's more in one part of the world, sometimes there's more in another part of the world. But the good point is that we are getting better all across the globe. We are advancing toward that ultimate peace and unity as one race, one human race. Now, somebody like Rumi, he wrote a poem every day, but I write one poem every 2 years. So I want to conclude with sharing two of the things that I wrote based on what I learned from Baha'i Faith and Rumi. Could I share them with you?
Please.
But, this is just hallucination or reflections. Think of it in that fashion, but this is basically bringing these ideas together. One of them I said, love without boundaries. I said that my love has no bounds, and in my heart there is no remnant of hate. Some say he'll be saved, you won't. She'll go to heaven, you'll go to hell. He believes, you don't. Others say we believe in God, you believe in nature. We love a man, you love a woman. We know more, you know less. We love our kind, you love all kinds. And I say, my love has no bounds. Your love has no bounds. But you don't know it. Our God and our prophets are all the same. Believers, agnostics, and atheists are all in search. Except for some, the search has stopped. Love's boundaries have been drawn. Limits have been determined. For some others, love has been suffocated. Their nostrils are blocked to smell the fragrance. Their eyes are shut to see the roses. Their feelings are dampened to experience the exhilaration. Oh, my beloved, let your love travel the oceans and the lands. Let your love light the alleys, the streets and the cities. Let your love shine on me, shine on him, and shine on her. And then you shall fly, sing, dance, and your joy will be forevermore. So that's what I learned from Rumi and other masters. And finally, so I wrote that one was 1999, so 2 years later. In 2001, I wrote this one. It says, I called it What We Believe. You believe in God, I believe in the mystery of our existence. You believe in heaven, I believe in sublimity of the skies. You believe in angels, I believe in the magnificence of the stars. You believe in Noah, I believe in the power of the oceans. You believe in Abraham, I believe in the need for sacrifice. You believe in Krishna, I believe in harmonious thoughts. You believe in Zoroaster, I believe in good thoughts and good deeds. You believe in Moses, I believe in majesty of the mountains. You believe in Buddha, I believe in the purifying power of water. You believe in Jesus, I believe in gentility of the human heart. You believe in Muhammad, I believe in the need for justice. You believe in Baha'u'llah, I believe in the oneness and wholeness of the human race. Methinks we both believe in the same things, if you only knew it, if you dared to admit it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was the very first poem that you read, what's the name of that one, about seeing you for the first time and looking at you through 1,000 eyes?
At the beginning of the
At the
talk,
very beginning of the talk, yeah. Yes.
the poem was you said what's the title of it? Or,
Yes, exactly. Look it up.
many of them don't have a title, but the poem was "From the beginning of my life, I've been looking for your face." That's the one you.
Mhm.
Basically, that's one of his best love poems. Actually, I have I'd emailed the poems that I wanted to share to April.
You want to share it? I can share it with Laurel, or how do you?
We can send it out to the entire meeting.
Could you send it out?
I can send it out.
And I have one copy. I'll leave it here.
We could also put it on Facebook.
So, yeah, the first page is the summary of Rumi's life that I shared with you, and the other 2 pages I shared half of what I meant to share, which are really his choice poems that he has revealed in those days. So I'll leave that here for you.
Yeah, we can get that.
I thought that one seemed like it might have come from earlier in his life when you were talking about how he switched
Oh,
years. That one
most
seemed
probably
a
from
little more-
you can say the first 18, 19 years and the last 10, 11 years. Yeah. Most of these deep love poems are from the first
Yeah.
10, 20 years.
A hopeless romantic kind of
Yeah.
feeling to it.
Right.
But still very much in touch with God.
Yes. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Some of you did not say a word, so maybe you want to say a word.
If your only knowledge of Rumi is through Coleman Barks and you want to go back and read some of the maybe more accurate translations,
Yes.
what would be your first foray into that?
Nicholson, I have it on this thing also. Nicholson is one of the first ones after George. What's his name? Edward Brown had written has translated some poems, but he knew a young man whose name was Nicholson, who in early 20th century has translated beautifully a lot of his work. And then after him, Arbery. So these are the 2 major good translators. Coleman Barks is wonderful, but sometimes I read it and I say that's not really the poem. But Coleman Barks went actually to Konya and spent 9 years there and really learned Sufism and learned Sufis, but he did not know Persian language.
Right.
So he had others translate for him, and then he told, what did I learn from it? And then he translated his own ways. But a lot of his poetry is also good also.
Nicholson and what?
Arbery,
Arbery.
Arbery.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Fabulous as always.
Will you come back?
So very nice.
Thank you.
When can you come back?
Anytime. I love to be here, and I'll share with you Baha'i poetry as well.
Oh, yeah. Bring some of your Baha'i music with you too.
Yeah.
We got a lot of musicians in this center, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm sure y'all know some of the
Good.
Baha'i artists locally. So.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah.
if you would, as a tradition, the small box on our donation box is for the teacher of for the day. So if you could please leave donation in the small box, and that will go directly to the professor. He has.
And please put it there, but then give it back to the center.
We always offer it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your offering. Yeah.
We'll close with 3 bells and a great vows.
Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
If we could have a volunteer two to reset the Zendo and to wash the cups. Thank you.
I'll reset the sender.
And I have at least one page of Ruby's lessons and forms that I would share with everyone here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Before you take off, I'll get a picture.